Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. This is your weekly catch-up on everything happening in North Carolina politics and public policy. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Joining us this week from the John Locke Foundation, Dr. Andy Jackson and Mitch Kokai. And then from Carolina Journal, our opinion editor, we have David Larson and CJ reporter Brianna Kramer. Every time we sit down here, it feels like we have some other big breaking story. Certainly right now in Raleigh on this Thursday, last night, former President Donald Trump just filled the arena in Charlotte while current President Joe Biden was explaining from the Oval Office why he was dropping out of the 2024 campaign. Okay, so it seems like there's some energy brewing around the vice president. Kamala Harris is getting a ton of donations. Do you think that this really has re-energized them, or do you think it's just a lot of, excitement?
That's the $10,000 question,
right,
or however much money that question is supposed to be, is will this re-energize them? Because Kamala Harris is, she's been kind of a behind-the-scenes character, and her polling hasn't really differentiated herself much from Biden, but it's unclear is that because of Biden's unpopularity or what. So there's a lot of energy on the Trump side, especially after the assassination attempt.
Sure.
And that
was just 2 weeks ago.
It was just 2 weeks ago.
Hard to believe.
And our reporter was on the scene yesterday in the Charlotte event, and it seemed like it was electric. A lot of the Trump people are very energized after that, and are the Democrats going to be able to match that is the question, because she'll have some opportunity to, maybe the Democrats can redefine her in the public's eye, see if they can make her form her in some way that's likable and that will be able to match that energy. And then she'll also get the opportunity soon to pick a vice presidential, a running mate there. So our current governor Roy Cooper is on that list and is being mentioned at the top of it, and then first or second slot often.
Sure.
So that will be interesting to see. That really does shake up the whole race. Obviously, with Biden not stepping down from the presidency apparently, but just from being the top of the ticket. So we'll see what that does, and we'll have polling out soon. I'm sure other.
We're going to have a Carolina Journal poll in the field very, very soon. We're going to get some of the latest details on this. Mitch, tell me what your thoughts are. Something that we've heard over and over again in recent days is that you have millions of Democrat primary voters who aren't going to be able to pick their candidate. What do you think that means in the larger scope of election integrity?
Well, in terms of integrity, it's certainly not democratic the way they're going about it. But to me, it'll be interesting to see how many of those Democrats who are grumbling about the fact that they didn't really actually get to vote to put Kamala Harris on the top of the ticket, how much that'll matter in the end.
Sure.
The two parties hate each other so much that you're basically, if you're a Democrat, you're likely to vote for whoever they're going to put on there because you don't want Trump. And on the other side, the Republicans are going to vote for whoever's up against the Democrats because they don't want to see 4 more years of what we've had now. So probably that's going to end up being a lot of grumbling that doesn't end up going anywhere. Although in a very tight race, if there are some Democrats who stay home or don't want to cast a ballot for president or go for RFK Jr., or if they have an opportunity for a Cornel West or someone else, might throw the protest vote in there, and that could make a difference. So it'll be interesting to see.
Sure. Will this come down to turnout, Dr. Jackson?
Yeah, certainly. This is definitely shaping up to be a turnout election. I think at least there's initial indications that Democrats are a little more energized with Harris on the ticket compared to Biden. Certainly we saw that. I said last time I was on here that it would take a come to Jesus moment for Biden to drop out of the race. It wasn't come to Jesus, it was come to the donors. And donations dried up. People were telling him, the jig is up, you're going to have to get out of the way, which he did. And then you saw the spigots just opened wide.
Right.
And, there was tens of millions of dollars. I think it was like $100 million in 36 hours, something like that. And so that certainly is going to get her, on the air a lot more than she otherwise would have done. I think certainly younger voters that are typically part of the Democratic base are going to be more energized. So I think you're going to see both sides really working to gin up that turnout even more. And I don't know if we're going to be hitting records, at least modern records, but I think it's going to be close.
That's encouraging. And now, Brianna, you've covered a lot this week with North Carolina State Board of Elections. We just mentioned Cornel West and RFK. What's the latest on that? There was a hearing down at the legislature.
Yeah, so the House Oversight and Reform Committee this week, they held a meeting in Raleigh just to kind of go over concerns that have been growing about the State Board of Elections and what they're doing with these third parties, because they've met the threshold needed of petition signers in order to get on the ballot and create a new political party. And yet the State Board of Elections has not allowed the parties to become official parties in North Carolina. So after some time, they did end up allowing We the People to become a party, but still Justice for All has not been certified. So the committee held a meeting just to investigate if there's outside influences and what is going on with the decision-making process here.
Did you get a sense from some of those questions from lawmakers that they felt like there was some level of outside influence on their decisions?
Yeah, definitely, because we know that Clear Choice Action, PAC, backed by the Democrat Party and the Elias Law Group, sent a letter to the State Board of Elections notifying them of possible fraud. So I think the main concern is a group like this, a Democrat-leaning group or left-leaning group, influencing the way that the board is handling certifying new parties.
Sure, sure. Now, of course, how lucky are we that you're here with us and with the John Locke Foundation. You had a chance to tell them, share your expertise with those lawmakers. What were your concerns and what did you say to them?
Well, I had several concerns.
Sure.
I guess the most immediate was that you really do have this system. We have a partisan board, and so we can't really be surprised when a partisan board acts in a partisan way. And couple that with this outside information that was coming in. And I have no doubt that when you have a petition process, just like when you have an election, there's going to be some fraud involved. The question is, was it sufficient to invalidate the total number of signatures, or at least enough signatures to get them below the threshold that they needed, which is a little bit under 14,000. I wasn't convinced that they met that threshold, that ability to push them down below the minimum that they needed to get in. And so this was really the state board extrapolating information that was provided by these Democratic groups in order to take out a party that was probably going to take more votes from Biden than it would from Trump. And this is a real concern, and I am not convinced that Republicans wouldn't do the same if they had the power to do so. I think the Constitution Party would have had a more difficult time than they did if Republicans were in charge. Now that this has become the norm, because the example of the Green Party that I gave before, they got certified in 2018, it was 5-0. When they came back again, the state board, in 2022, the state board put the stop on them, and they had to sue to be able to get on the ballot. And I think this is the new norm, and really there needs to be reforms in how the petition process is done, or we're just going to see this kind of thing every year, no matter which side is in control.
So folks that are saying, I don't like either candidate, I want a third party, does that mean that's really not on the table for North Carolinians or in the foreseeable future?
It's going to be more difficult. It's not going to be impossible. You're probably going to have to start hiring lawyers earlier in the process.
Okay.
Now, Justice for All is suing. Interesting enough, it's in a federal court in Elizabeth City, so the lawyers for the state board are going to be making some long drives, maybe doing some per diems on some hotels to handle this court case. But if you can't depend on the board to have kind of a balanced process, then you're really going to have to fight to defend yourself much earlier in the game than kind of this post hoc defense. So
Sure.
I think the lawyers are definitely going to have to start getting hired earlier.
Are there some policy things that we can do, either constitutional amendments or, what is on the table that could help with this?
Well, I advocated to the committee that there are several things you could do. I think the most important is, one thing I like that the board did is they looked at the information that was given to them by Clear Choice Action, and then they did their own assessment. They did a random sample. The problem was the sample was done months after most of the people had signed the petition, so there's evidence that there's memory failures once you start asking people, especially people, some people may always remember everything they signed, but some people, it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. If they approach to you in front of the Walmart parking lot and they say, well, that's interesting, if I'll sign it, you might not recall,
Sure.
4 or 5 months later. And so there's that deficiency. The sample size was a little smaller than I would have liked as well. Not by itself disqualifying, because it's really hard to get enough people to return your calls, so to speak. But that is, I think, the single biggest thing you can do. I think you probably need to get the petition deadline moved up about a month, because clearly now we've got delay after delay after delay, and this has become the new norm. So it's clear that the state board probably needs more time to do its job on here, and without bumping up on the deadline, because pretty soon, even if Justice for All doesn't win this lawsuit in the next couple of weeks, it's going to be too late, because ballots are going to start getting printed, and ballots are going to go out. So these are reforms that I hope they will look at the General Assembly in 2025 in time for the next time we have a party petitioning.
Sure. Also this week, you signed on to a letter encouraging lawmakers to take up a constitutional amendment on voter ID. What's the timeline for something like that if they were to decide to do that?
Well, it's obviously too late to be on this year. Well, conceivably they could do it in July.
Like Monday,
they'd have to do it. Yeah, they'd have to do it like in the next week to get it on the ballot this year.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that is doable. I don't really know what they have on their plate coming up next week, but you're going to have to get it done. Well, let me take a step back on that. If you don't get it done next week, then you got time. So you can consider it. They're going to meet a couple of other times apparently this year. They could get it on the ballot for 26, or take it up during the long session.
Sure. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, that'll be interesting to see. The General Assembly has not given any kind of clue that they're coming back anytime soon. So I doubt they're going to take up any more amendments. We're probably going to only have the citizen-only voting amendment on the ballot. It would be very shocking if they take up any of the others that would be of interest. The amendment on voter ID for all voting, the amendment for lowering the tax cap, all of those have been in the works. The literacy test, all of those have been in the works, but that doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do that. In terms of the Justice for All case, Andy mentioned the fact that there has to be a fairly quick timeline. The folks who sued and are asking for a preliminary injunction that would get them on the ballot, they've asked Judge Boyle, who's the judge who's in Elizabeth City, which is why he's making everyone come out to him rather than come to Raleigh. They've asked him to make a decision by August 19th. They say that would be the absolute latest they could get something so that they could comply with some of the ballot deadlines. He's holding a hearing next week. Might make a decision then, but given the fact that he scheduled the hearing so quickly and had that August 19th date as the date to have it a ruling, perhaps he just has his hearing, takes it under advisement, and within a week or so then decides whether to grant the injunction.
Very interesting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess it's just unfortunate that it has to have this patina of partisanship to it. In theory, somebody should just, if the county boards certify some signatures, they should submit those to the board, and then each one of those should be looked at maybe equally. But I don't think people think the Constitution Party, that was one of the ones that was very quickly approved, and then that would take votes from the right, and then RFK's party probably a balance, so both of those were given a little more leeway. But I don't know that they did the same random sampling or criticism of those parties. So it just has that look of a partisan thing. And I guess I just wonder, is this whole, just from a bigger view, is that the whole practice of going out to some concert or on the street corner and gathering all these signatures to get a party on, is that even a necessary thing? Does that help us in some way, or can we just, if somebody's able to get enough money and people together to start a party, should you just be like, okay, you can be a party even if you get 0.5% of the vote? So
just let everybody.
I mean, if they're able to do it and do the paperwork, because a lot of times, they reach out to these people 6 months later, and they're like, do you remember at this festival you signed this thing? And maybe they don't remember, or maybe they don't know exactly what they signed anymore.
Might not remember the festival.
They might not. They might not remember the festival. So I just wonder if that whole practice is really, does that add anything to the system of getting parties on, or does it become a partisan gatekeeping thing where everybody's not trusting each other? And
well, that's the thing. Voter apathy and lack of engagement and frustration with the electoral process, that could keep people away.
Yeah, and just kind of the cynical idea that the people who are allowing parties on are partisans for one of the two main ones, you just start to think, why would they want to, like with the Green Party last time was the furthest left third party, and then the We the People is the furthest left third party this time. Those were the two ones that got the most spotlight on them, scrutiny on them. So
yeah, very interesting. So from this, what do you think has come from this hearing and lawmakers? Do you anticipate further action from them or more investigation?
I think further action definitely will come from
Okay.
this. Legislators expressed concern and want to do something. They heard directly from Alan Hirsch, he's the chairman of the
Okay.
board, and then the director, Karen Brinson Bell. So they both spoke remotely, as well as Dr. Andy Jackson.
Yes.
And so they kind of were able to hear information from them, from what they've been doing in this process, and then also get recommendations from you. So they
Right.
were able to kind of take that and
Sure.
hopefully make some changes in the future.
All right.
And remember,
Yeah.
there's also an ongoing lawsuit that could affect all of this. It's being appealed up to the state Supreme Court, which is the legislation the General Assembly passed that would make the State Board of Elections an equal
Well, that was
split
actually my
between
question. Yeah.
Republicans and Democrats.
What's happened with that?
Well, right now, what happened was Governor Cooper filed suit against it.
Okay.
Won at the trial court level. A three-judge panel said, no, you can't make that change, especially not at this time, as we're in an election cycle.
Sure.
And so that decision's being appealed. I doubt there's going to be any resolution of it during this election cycle.
Right.
But if the state Supreme Court eventually gets this case and says, yes, the General Assembly can change the makeup of the State Board of Elections to make it 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, you would not have the same type of problem that we have with this situation, where it appears that the 3-2 Democratic majority on the State Board of Elections is playing partisan games,
Sure.
whether they are or not.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd just like to add a sidebar before we
Please.
leave this topic. I mentioned last time I was on that comparatively for the 3 parties that were being considered, the Constitution had a super easy time. I think
Okay.
that was the term I used. I got an email from the Constitution Party, and while I was down at the General Assembly on Tuesday, a member of the Constitution Party came up to me and informed me that in fact their process was not super easy at all.
Okay.
They had to jump through a lot of hoops. Now, the certification votes were certainly differentiated. The Constitution Party comparatively sailed through, but they said that they had to deal with a lot of paperwork problems and a lot of issues from the state board. So there may be the time may be ripe to go ahead and really look seriously at reforming this process.
if you don't mind me asking,
Yeah.
though, do you think there is value to the signature gathering
I
exercise?
I think there is, because it is a way of showing at least potential support. I think that if you institute some of the reforms that I talked about, and potentially others, we're still early in the process of investigating reforms. I really think that there's value to showing that, hey, at least potentially, if we get on here, we will have tens of thousands of potential voters. Otherwise, you could have groups just parachuting in, dropping a lot of money, and then we could have like a dozen new parties on
Sure.
the ballot every time.
Very interesting. All right. So it seems like it was about a century ago, but COVID is still an issue for a lot of people. And there are some sort of lingering lawsuits that you've covered this week for us. Fill us in on what's happening with some of those. There are a lot of businesses that just still have not recovered.
Yeah, very briefly, the courts are still dealing with these COVID cases, and the 2 that had some interesting developments this week, one of them was in the case of bars that Governor Cooper shut down and kept shut down while other
Right.
businesses reopened during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are 2 different cases at the state Supreme Court dealing with bar shutdowns and attempts to get some money out of the state because they lost business and could not practice their livelihood. The governor is trying to throw these lawsuits out. There was a court filing this week from the bar owners explaining why they should be able to move forward with their suit. The other suit that had some interesting developments is the one of the teenager in Guilford County who got the COVID-19 vaccination against his will and without parental consent. Basically, he sat down and said, hey, I was just supposed to get a COVID test, and a clinic worker said, no, give it the vaccine anyway.
Right.
And so they've sued, have lost at the trial court level and appeals court level, but have appealed to the state Supreme Court. And the issue seems to be whether a federal law called the PrEP Act, Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, creates immunity for the Guilford County School Board and the Old North State Medical Society. Lower courts have said yes, this federal act gives them immunity because the COVID vaccine was an important thing that the federal government recognized, and so no one involved in giving the vaccine can be sued unless the person dies.
Right.
And so the challenge now is whether the PrEP Act actually does bar this lawsuit. And there was a court filing from the teen and his mother saying, no, this is not what that PrEP Act was designed to immunize people from.
Sure. What's the next step in these?
Well, in both cases, the cases are at the state Supreme Court,
Okay.
so they'll continue filing briefs, and then
Sure.
none of the cases have yet been scheduled for oral arguments.
Okay.
But they'll have oral arguments, and then they'll make a decision.
Certainly, certainly, and we'll have that coverage on CarolinaJournal.com. Make sure you get in there and look at CarolinaJournal.com. We've got tremendous amount of analysis, opinion, news coverage of all the stories that we've talked about here today. One thing I got to point out, we have bobbleheads. For those of you who know Mitch, you know that he likes these bobbleheads. Tell me what you have here.
Well, the ones that we have sitting out here are from the National Bobblehead Hall of Fame, which is basically a bobblehead store in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But
When you get a chance, look who they are.
The ones that we have are justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. We have, I believe, from left to right, if people are looking at the wide shot, we've got Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Barrett. The reason I brought these out here is that an interesting development this week is that this particular company is now hawking a couple of new bobbleheads, both of which feature Donald Trump. One of them, he has his hand up in the fight, fight, fight pose with a bloody face. And in the other one, he has the ear bandage that we have seen. As I said when we're talking about this with you earlier, anything to make a buck.
Anything to make a
Anything
buck.
to make a buck.
Certainly not an endorsement or sales in any way. I just thought it was a little bizarre to be selling bobbleheads of an attempted assassination.
You can see bobbleheads for almost anything, and if they think they can make a buck off of it, they will.
They will.
There's
they
actually
will.
a trend among Trump supporters, though, to wear the bandage
I saw that.
as like a
So
solidarity
weird.
kind of thing.
So weird.
Yeah.
So it's not just the bobblehead people that are
Just
on that trend.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate you being here on the debrief with us, and make sure you check out CarolinaJournal.com. Have a great weekend.